Well, when William Ellery Channing was a young boy, 10 years or so after the American Revolution, he lived in a severe home with a Calvinist family that believed in eternal damnation, that we are sinners, and that God is vindictive to those who disobeyed. One day, as a boy, Channing attended church with his father as usual. Fire and brimstone preaching, damnation, his father agreeing with amens and songs of blood on the cross and sacrifices. And this went on for hours, as it did back then. You'll be relieved to know that sermons back then were actually 3 or 4 hours long. That day, Channing and his father retired to the parlor in their home after church. His father took off his boots, set fire, put his feet up, lit a pipe, and picked up the newspaper from the week before. At that moment, Channing was stunned. Not that this was anything new, but that he had a new awareness. He realized his father didn't believe any of what they had just agreed to 5 hours of church in. They were there, his father, in his eyes, a believer in the church and uncaring at home, a slave to social convention and theology of sin and shame, a subscriber to the spiritual traps of God's condemnation of humanity, but unfazed by ideas in his home life. At that moment, Channing vowed to figure out a way to live free from such a faith. His mission in life became emancipation of a kind. Channing probably thought a lot about freedom and slavery in his daily life. His family lived in Newport, Rhode Island, one of the largest slave ports in New England. Ships came and went from the Middle Passage from Newport. And undoubtedly, he saw slaves and slave ships and probably knew the captains of those ships as well through his church. His goal in life became, at first, religious emancipation and eventually the abolition of slavery. Channing would not live to hear the Emancipation Proclamation. He died in 1842, but he wrote a version of it himself in his definitions of American Unitarianism. You see, by the early 1800s, Channing would become a prominent Unitarian theologian of Boston, telling people they didn't have to live under the threat of an angry, vengeful God, that we could live up to the expectations of God for humanity, that we could be free of the religion of old that sought to enslave the soul with the spiritual seesaw of sin and salvation. For Channing, American Unitarianism, based on what he learned from German theology and from the European Unitarians of the 16th century, looked like this. He said God was one, not three, and really kind of a mystery. That's why making claims about it was difficult for him. He believed that Jesus was man, not God, the example of holy life, but not a sacrifice from God to cleanse the world of sin. And eventually, he said that we are essentially good, not essentially evil. These arguments came from a demand that we use reason. And when reason was used, they said, when we read the Bible, the Christian religion wasn't found in the Bible. They saw nothing explicit about the Trinity or the divinity of Jesus or the inherent nature of sin in humanity. And so those Unitarians held debates, and most of them we lost. But in America, we gained a foothold through the leadership of people like Channing and people like Theodore Parker, who wrote that there are transient expressions of permanent truths, that our faiths and our practices are transient while God is permanent and infinite. All these things added up to a few lasting ideas: that we don't accept easy answers to complex questions, and above all, we try to live holy lives, examples of God's holiness, without getting too wrapped up in one book, one way, or one expression of God. Today you can go to Unitarian villages in Europe, though, especially in Transylvania, where on the ceilings of their churches are not paintings of Adam receiving life from God, but rather the Copernican universe and images of paradise for all. You will not find crosses there, but you will find Bible stories about Jesus' good deeds and compassion depicted. By the way, there was one area of Europe, the Carpathian Mountains, that were untouched by the bubonic plague. The people of that area, the people who would become Unitarians. I'm just saying, that's it maybe is something to that. For the early Unitarians in Europe and in America, faith was in a God who was forgiving. It transcended Jesus. It was about freedom of debate. Like our Protestant cousins, the Unitarians deconstructed hierarchies of all forms of orthodoxy. They made decisions within congregations, not for congregations. They sought to free the mind and the heart in the pursuit of rational religion. Our form of religion was created to be a living tradition, as we say now. A faith that responds to the times, that evolves, that welcomes change, and welcomes change agents through each generation who challenge the faith. The first children of the first Unitarian and ministers of America were the Transcendentalists, who asked us to experience God beyond the church, to look into nature, into our own hearts and minds. People like Ralph Waldo Emerson, himself a minister, and Margaret Fuller were not content with the sobriety and mildness and calm rationalism of Unitarianism. They longed for more intense spiritual experience. So the Transcendentalists emphasized the inherent goodness of people and nature. They pushed us beyond the clabbered churches of New England and into the woods, into life's experience to find God. Other change agents included the humanists who followed the two generations after that through the First and Second World War. They asked us if God was important at all. And women changed us, asking us to combat patriarchy in our faith and share leadership and find a feminine spirit expressed through the sources that we seek. And so on and so on. We continue to grow and change, mostly because Unitarianism emphasized the core notion that no religion is whole unless free will and the flexibility to learn new things were part of what we are all about. If all this puzzles you, I think you're probably in the right place. Most people are actually puzzled by us. Everywhere I go, I get 3 responses to me telling them I'm a Unitarian. One is, oh, you're the believe anything you want church. Oh, you're the justice church. And the third thing is, honestly, we're really glad you're here because those people over there are really crazy. We are thought of as the no-faith faith. People think because we question the divinity of Jesus 500 years ago, we somehow left the religious fold. I don't really get that logic. It's kind of like if you question how your grandmother believed that if she crossed herself 3 times that nothing bad would happen, does that mean you're kicked out of the family? I don't think so. People also think that we're the justice church. Damn right we are. We've been part of so many justice movements in America, from abolition to women's rights to LGBT to Black Lives Matter, for 2 reasons. We know what is right and what it's like to be on the losing side of dominance. And honestly, people are happy when we show up because we are there, rational, challenging the status quo. One time I was at an interfaith meeting downtown, and a woman came up to me after the meeting and said, I don't know who you are or really what you're all about, but you ask great questions. All these aspects are part of our faith because of our roots. Now, I'm sure, like Aaron said last week about universal salvation, that you didn't wake up wondering whether Jesus was man or God, or if the Trinity is biblical, or even if God cares about you. You might have read the news and wondered if we are essentially good or essentially evil. That's a response I'm having a lot to the news these days. To which I would caution on this point, it makes a difference how we respond to people. If we see them as essentially evil versus essentially good. For me, when I see indictments and the recklessness in politics or evil in the world, my faith reminds me that I can't discount anyone outright. My faith challenges me to wrestle with the evil I see. And in the end, it pushes me to compassion, not retribution, for those who have lost their way to the core of goodness that they have. I know that's a tough spiritual exercise, but it comes straight down from our Unitarian ancestors. The driving theme, I think, in Unitarianism that comes to us from 500 years of history is freedom. And it's not that freedom is ours alone. In fact, if you think about Christianity actually, through the atonement, is supposed to set people free, but the interpretation of Christianity developed into such a faith of conformity and orthodoxy that I think it left its original radical roots of love and compassion and the disruption of the empire mentality. And that's where I think we differ so much. I think in some ways we have tried to hold on to those essential root causes in Christianity. We have said Jesus' radical nature taught us to see all people as holy and seek freedom for all and to question the hell out of faith, which makes us a big tent with supple walls, but a place ultimately where we together seek emancipation, not the following of a set of rules. And that means that to be here, you have to be comfortable in the search for meaning rather than meaning being provided to you by people like me. You might wake up tomorrow morning, instead of asking, was Jesus God? You might prefer to ask the question, how can I free myself and others? Now that would be a good Unitarian question. Because it is to be free is the search, and the search for meaning means to be uncomfortable with prescribed thoughts and feelings. I have always had a comfort in this freedom in the search because I grew up Unitarian. I benefited from not having to recover from the religion of my childhood. I know I'm a minority in this room, although the two of us share that. My parents came to Unitarianism because they were Christian and they were Jewish and they had left their faith dogmas, but they found they didn't have to check who they were at the door. They loved that we learned an openness, not rote lessons about the Bible, that we learned to think for ourselves, to feel the pain of the world as motivators to action. I know that some of you struggle to get free religiously because I hear it in your questions sometimes. Like, but what is the structure that holds this all together? There is no authority, there's no Bible, it sounds sometimes to me like the Israelites asking Moses to go back to Egypt when they were finding freedom difficult and disconcerting. It comes from a deep need for the right answers. And I know you've heard that children's sermon a minister was giving when she asked, what I'm thinking of is a brown, has bushy tail and gathers acorns each fall. Do you children know what I'm talking about? To which one of the children says, I'm sure the right answer is Jesus, but it sure sounds like a squirrel to me. Early on in my upbringing as a Unitarian, I knew the right answers are not the easy ones, that uncertainty is freedom, and Jesus can't be the answer to everything. Sometimes a squirrel actually is a squirrel. Because here we believe, as Antoine Saint-Exupéry wrote, to live is to be slowly born. For us to be born again is not to finally land on one answer, but to be challenged by freedom. Not to rest on dogma, but to use reason and seek wonder and to lose oneself in hope and always, always develop a spirit that is the core to our roots, to break down barriers between us and see the holy in each. And in that way, we are born again and again. Maya Angelou once said, "Many things continue to amaze me. I'm startled or taken aback when people tell me they are Christians. My first response is the question, already?" It seems to me, she said, a lifelong endeavor. The idyllic can't be arrived at or held on to eternally. It is in the search itself that one finds the ecstasy. If I had to add to our Unitarian contribution, I would say that they and us believe deeply in the search being the ecstasy. The Unitarian contribution to this endeavor also added that our salvation is not a once and for all moment that happens when we assent to an idea, but rather in the development of our character. That no one is safe until they are sound at the center. The Unitarians gave us the idea that no faith is genuine unless it makes us faithful in the best sense of that word, that it helps us to strive to be honest, good people, to know the deepest place in ourselves. They gave us the idea that the truth is not sealed once and for all, but that your experience and my experience shed light on truths that give us inspiration to move toward living our spiritual values and healing the world. They said that these searches for meaning are not a luxury. They are our spiritual work as human beings. Bill Porterfield wrote Praise and Puzzlement over Unitarians in the late 70s in Dallas. I actually think he was in some kind of debate with the ministers about what this place was all about. And that's why he so publicly expressed his puzzlement and praise of us in that publication. He wasn't wrong. We are no easy faith. But these theologies, these histories have led us into places where we tried to make the world a better place. Because of the Unitarians, we are called to find new ways for this faith to emerge in ethical and moral and social reform, in resistance, in unveiling evils that keep us separated and disempowered, in all kinds of ways that divide and conquer the souls of our lives and our world. Porterfield was right, and he was in some way echoing the child, William Ellery Channing, as he was trying to free himself and his people. Thinking for oneself and coming to independent inclinations about the meaning of life and wanting to be free of social convention and theological shame and spiritual traps is a lonely and difficult task, as Porterfield said. But what Porterfield didn't know was how strong this community helps so many of us who show up here to do this lonely but spiritually fulfilling work together. That is Unitarianism 101 today, my friends. So be it. Welcome. I love you, and amen.